one of the, I suppose, arguments for the right to terminate is generally very broadly thrown around the health of the mother. In your 45 years of experience, has a child ever had to be terminated so that the mother would live, or vice versa?
I absolutely promise you that after 45 years, not only have I ever had to choose between a mother and a baby, I've never seen a mother die in order to save a baby. And I've never worked in a hospital where a mother was sacrificed for the sake of the baby. And that is the complete and honest truth.
Well, welcome to another Parousia podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Father Ben, flying solo today and joined by Dr. Simon McCaffrey. Dr. Simon, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Father Ben.
This has been a long time in the making. Your reputation is one in Sydney and beyond that is an important one that we're going to touch on. But first, I thought you might want to introduce who you are as a doctor and how you came to this point in your life and what motivated you perhaps to get into the field that you're in.
Well, thanks, Father Ben, and apologies for that delay. I can assure you it was my fault and mine entirely. So yes, look, I'm a aging obstetrician and gynecologist. I've been an obstetrician and gynecologist now for 45 years. I did my initial residency at Royal North Shore Hospital, did a term in obstetrics and gynecology, loved it, had a inkling that it's a vocation I wish to pursue. But unfortunately struggled at the time with getting a training job because abortion had been deemed legal when done of necessity by the Menhennet ruling in, I think, 1972. So abortions were being performed in public hospitals. A lot of the older obstetricians weren't keen to do termination of pregnancies, so they expected the registrars, the training doctors, to do them. That was never going to be the case with myself, so finding a training job in virtually Australia was impossible. Hence, I travelled overseas to various countries in Africa, in Ireland, where abortion wasn't an issue in terms of obstetric practice. Gained a lot of experience, and then after some time found that experience allowed me to return to Sydney and work as a training obstetrician, because a lot of my bosses at the time decided that with that experience, it meant they didn't have to get out of bed at 3 a.m. to assist me, and hence that became more important than my pro-life approach. And finished my training at Westmead Hospital. Around that time I got married, wasn't ready to settle into private practice. So my wife and myself had a sort of working holiday. My eldest daughter was born in Ireland. We had a wonderful couple of years in Ireland and England working, and then my parents got sick. I returned to Sydney. We looked after them for a couple of years, and while we were looking after them, a position came available at Liverpool Hospital and Campbelltown, and we moved out to Macquarie Fields with my parents, and they subsequently both died out with us in Macquarie Fields, and that's where my practice took off. And I've been working ever since at Liverpool, and recently, the last couple of years, I've been working at Gosford Hospital as well as an obstetrician and gynaecologist. In terms of believing beyond literally the idea of abortion was simply impossible for me. Even before I started obstetrics, Humani Vitae, for example, came out in 1968. I read it as a 14, 15-year-old. Intuitively, you understood, you realised the truth of what it was saying, but there was a lot I didn't understand about it, both the theology and the practice. But fortunately, over the last 40 years, I've realised that the practice of Humani Vitae is as valid as the theology. And that's made my practice, in many respects, a lot easier. You'd think, people thought, my mother especially when I went overseas, that it was all going to be too hard. But it's funny, I've actually found Humani Vitae makes obstetric gynecological practice easier because you understand that the truth is played out in people's lives to an extraordinary degree. And that's where I am at the moment. It's a journey which I don't see it as difficult at all.
Let's touch on that for a moment, because your field of work has been ravaged by political campaigns, an extremist feminist movement, and people almost, when they think about pregnancy, when they think about, I suppose, surprise pregnancies, they oftentimes get mixed up in those debates. And as a result, I've had friends, even doctors, who have almost been reluctant to go down the path you've gone down because of what they perceive to be the messiness of the industry. But your faith convicted you to say, I want to get into this field, but I'm not going to go near that stuff. How did you navigate that? Obviously, you traveled around the world and you're able to do that. But what of a person that says, I don't want to travel, I'm convicted to do this here in Sydney, and I believe I can do good, but I don't want to go near the whole, abortion side of things. Is it possible for a young person to get into this field and not go near any of that?
It is. In fact, I would encourage anybody who feels they have a vocation in that area to pursue it, not to be frightened, not to be worried about outcomes. In fact, I would argue it might be easier for a pro-life doctor at the moment to work in obstetrics and gynae, simply because in 1979, there were no preterm clinics. Abortions were done in public hospitals. Registrars were expected to do them. And there was very little, the recruiting of trainees was often done by the bosses themselves. So there was no oversight, human resources sort of oversight, the whole area of, the right to conscientious objection. It didn't exist in those days. The bosses decided who got the jobs. if that registrar wasn't going to do that work, it meant they had to do it. It was a problem for them. In a funny way, I understood where they were coming from. It wasn't going to change my attitude at all, but they were saying to me, we don't want to do them either. Nowadays, Murray Stopes has turned abortion into a business model with their preterm clinics. Not a lot of abortions are done in public hospitals. You've got a much more rigorous recruitment process where, for example, abortion can't be brought up in interviews, so that you're allowed to train. You're allowed a conscientious objection to abortion. And I would argue it's actually easier. I'm at the moment, with it, beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's more trainees who are pro-life in the training program than there was when I was training. So I would encourage young people, if you feel you have a vocation in women's health, obstetrics and gynecology, don't have any fears or concerns about training. It's, there's every year, there's men and women graduating who are pro-life. And the hospitals and the clinicians, their bosses, know it. In terms of getting onto the training scheme, one thing I would encourage anybody to do is to try and make yourself the best doctor you can. In other words, whilst it's not going to come up in the interview process, if in your years working in non-accredited years as an obstetrician and gynecologist, where often you're doing terms in obstetrics and gynecology, but it's not deemed to be accredited, you're not part of the training program. If you can demonstrate an unequivocal respect and desire to be the best possible doctor you can for women and mothers and babies under your care, you will get onto the training scheme, because other doctors will recognise that your prime concern is the welfare of women. And these doctors coming through now are demonstrating time and time again their respect and desire to be the best doctor to women as they possibly can, is removing a lot of those barriers which existed before, where a lot of clinicians thought, if you don't do terminations, if you don't do sterilisations, how can you be of assistance to women? That's all. Now, with the gift of hindsight, we're realising that's all nonsense. You can be of enormous help to women by not doing terminations, by not sterilising them. And in fact, a lot of women seek out those doctors because they want an alternative view of their health and well-being, without recourse necessarily to hormones, technology, interference. In other words, respect their body in a natural way and use nature and your own knowledge and expertise to achieve good outcomes for them. And that would be my message to young people.
Amen.
Go for it.
Amen. Do not be afraid.
Don't hold back.
That's right. Well, speaking of women's health, it makes sense to me that a doctor would be engaged and invested in the best outcomes for a woman, especially in a time where, for example, they may realize that they're pregnant, and there's a lot going on, and there might be societal pressure, there might be family pressure. How is it that we're able to help a woman and encourage them by saying, what you're going through is a good thing, what you're going through is a natural thing, and we're here to help? And the answer is not to intrude in a way that terminates your pregnancy, in other words, have an abortion. How is it that we can encourage? How have you, give us some anecdotes and some experiences that you've had in that area?
I would work on the premise that every pregnancy is a good and a natural thing, simply because it's a new life. And literally, I've never ever seen a newborn baby rejected. And we know they're one and the same thing. That child who, is delivered and is, being nursed by his or her mother, rejection it's unheard of. And yet you go back 8 months and there's a very real possibility that pregnancy will be rejected, will not be wanted. I don't think you would ever say I don't believe you'd ever say the baby's not wanted. The pregnancy's not wanted, in terms of the woman can be in a situation where she's so vulnerable, she's under so much pressure, that she feels she has no choice. It's very sad, because to some extent, at times I think, it's virtually insane to think that we would do anything to harm an unborn child. It must be insane, but yet it happens day in, day out. So I think the level of vulnerability, the level of pressure is very, very real. Often the mantra, and whenever legislation is being enacted, often the mantra is autonomy, it's my body, etc. But in the consulting room, where you're engaged in deep dialogue with a woman, that rarely comes up. It's more about the pressure and whether that woman feels she's being supported. And the statistics bear that out, well and truly. A lot of statistics lie, but there's some statistics which can never lie. And studies show that of babies who are conceived within marriage, only 4% are aborted. Of babies who are conceived outside of marriage, 47% are aborted. By the same token, of women who are married, 13% have had an abortion. Of women who are not married, 87% have had an abortion. In other words, the statistics are overwhelming that the biggest protection for an unborn child is marriage.
The stability of a
Is marriage, it's the support.
Yes.
Because whether a woman's married or not, most women feel nowadays autonomous. They're self-fulfilled, they've got their careers, they've got their lives. But the fact that marriage is so protective of unborn children demonstrates to me that if a woman feels supported within the relationship, especially marriage, that's the biggest protection for a child. And that comes out when you're engaged in pregnancy counselling. Very rare for a woman who's married to seek out an abortion.
Yeah.
Very common if they're out of marriage. Now, that makes a woman to some extent as much of a victim as the child, because they don't feel they've got the support to continue on with this pregnancy. And that's the role not only of obstetricians, but to me, more importantly, of society. Imagine if you could convince a woman, literally when she found out she was pregnant, that the world would stop if it meant she could continue with the pregnancy.
Yeah.
Very few women would abort if they knew the whole world wanted her to have that child.
Yeah, yeah. A mutual friend of ours, Mr. Paul Hanrahan, has been counselling on sidewalks for decades. And the first time I met Paul, he mentioned you. He said, Dr. McCaffrey always has his phone on, even if he's in mass. He'll walk out, he'll answer the phone if he sees my caller ID come up, because Paul is on that front line or last line, so to speak, where if he can get a woman to talk to him and say, love, we can support you. We can help you through this. And then he generally puts them in contact with you. And there's that line of support there that changes her worldview and changes everything about her approach to this so-called problem, which after a conversation with Paul and yourself is no longer a problem.
Well, look, I shouldn't be used in the same breath as Paul.
Thank God.
Paul's a saint.
He is a saint, and thank God he's got someone like you that can support, though. We all help each other out, don't we?
We do.
And you talk about that community, the whole world will stop.
Yep.
That's an example of, I think, the whole world being able to stop and support a woman through a pregnancy.
Yes.
When she might think she doesn't have a support network herself.
Yeah.
So,
and look, my role is fairly minor compared to Paul. For a person to wait lovingly outside preterm clinics and to know he never I've been with Paul when he's done that. He never imposes himself on
I've seen it with my own eyes. Yeah.
He never imposes himself. He never judgmentalizes a woman. For some reason, women seem to intuitively know that he's there to help them. It's extraordinary.
It is. It is.
And when he rings me, my role becomes very secondary because they're already 3/4 of the way on their journey. So all I do is an ultrasound, show them their baby's heartbeat, explain to them how we can assist them through a pregnancy, put them in touch with pregnancy help. My job's easy.
Mm. It's such an important thing. The very first time before it was illegal that I prayed outside an abortion clinic, I, for the first time ever, saw quite manifestly the good versus evil that happens in the world.
Yeah.
And Paul was so vital to my own interior conversion that I saw vulnerable women where the world will tell them, this is your choice right now. We're a pro-choice generation, and so you can make any choice you want. Well, then why was that the only choice you thought possible? Choice means that there's a lot on the table.
Yeah.
And I think you're right in saying we have to be a society that's better at giving women multiple choices and other forms of support outside of the choice to terminate another human life.
And Father Ben, you knew that evil was at work outside those preterm clinics when they introduced legislation to stop people like Paul from helping women, because that is all he did. As I said, he never imposed himself on a woman. He never denigrated a woman. The only women he made contact with continued on with a pregnancy and now are simply beyond joy isn't the word that they've got their child, because I still see them. They talk about Paul, and yet the legislators wouldn't let up until they removed him from the scene, even though he was helping, many women. To do that was so evil, because they wanted that small amount of good he was doing to be totally removed from that horrible, the whole scene of a preterm clinic, where an innocent life is negotiated for nothing.
Yeah.
And it was true evil at work, that. And he did a wonderful job, and now, we just keep trying to pursue the same outcome through different channels. Every time they close one door, we have to open another.
Yeah, we do. Now, the legislators will argue that we are giving women every choice in the world. We are giving them access to terminations at any stage of the pregnancy for whatever reason. And we're also giving them affordable means of avoiding pregnancy, such as contraception. It's all on the table. You've got everything you need. What makes us different to the legislators? And so let me expand on that for a moment. We promote love and life through Jesus Christ. God has made us. We believe in the natural law. Our bodies tell a truth about us. And a lot of that came to light in Humane Vitae. And so what, for example, is the difference between the way we view the human body versus the way the government wants to impose sanctions on the body by way of abortions and contraceptions?
So, like you, when you're raised in the faith, and all life and love comes from God himself, well then that is enough in itself. For a clinician, for an obstetrician, it's not. And I would probably discourage obstetricians when they're engaged in counselling discussion with women, probably not to bring Jesus into it, as much as that disappoints me. Nevertheless, the whole area of medico-moral teaching, luckily we've been given the truth, and the truth will work in every situation, and hence we use that truth for every single clinical scenario which comes up. And we have to go back a long, long way, early 60s, when contraception was coming to the fore. And it was viewed as very liberating, because it was going to give women and couples an opportunity to space their families. So it was going to do away with poverty, stress, overpopulation, you name it. It was simply, a means to the good of all individuals and families. And history has proved that to be the complete and utter opposite. The reason being that the contraception has managed to separate the personal self from our biological self, which is really dualism. Descartes, he was the early exponent of dualism, where the mind and the soul and the body are separate. And we know that that is never the case, but yet contraception has endorsed that dualistic approach to the human person, so that it separated the personal self, love, friendship, intimacy, from the biological self, which is life and procreation. And by doing that, it's actually made lives more difficult in a extraordinarily perverse sort of way, because it promised so much and yet it's delivered nothing. Once you separate the personal self from the biological self, once you separate our fertility from our personal self, what it means is that when you decide that you want to spend the rest of your life with a woman, what you're saying is, I want to give myself completely to you. I want my total self to be yours, except my fertility. You can't have my fertility. I'm sorry. I need to keep that for myself. That's what contraception does. And hence, you can't give yourself unconditionally to another person when you are denying them such an important part of your whole psyche, which is your fertility. And what that then did was it gave women a sense of control over their body, autonomy over their body, which seemed to be very liberating. But it was a false liberation in a sense, because once a person felt that the body was an instrument of their personal self, that they could use their body as a means to an end in terms of the good of themselves, well, then, of course, autonomy became such a liberating force that what was the argument for abortion? Autonomy. I have control of my body. And gender dysphoria, the same thing. It's about, I have control of my body. And yet, from at a metaphysical level, we really don't have control of our bodies. The holistic nature of health, well-being, flourishing is about our psyche, our love, our friendship, our intimacy being tied up with our bodies. And of course, dear old John Paul II, with the theology of the body, he looked at it in such depth, and yet metaphysically it was true, and at a clinical level, in terms of obstetric and gynecological practice, it is so completely true. The couples who give of themselves so much that they'll deny their spouse nothing, not even their fertility, they seem to have the happiest and the most fulfilling and probably the most physically satisfying marriages.
Yes.
And statistics bear it out.
Yes.
And yet, so many couples are being denied that flourishing because of the really the innate falsehood of contraception.
Yes. Yes.
And that's why Humani Vitae, in a funny way, made my practice so easy. Because, as I said, I didn't understand a lot of it when I was 15, 16. But by the time you're 40, 50, and time and again you see couples who are living one life as against couples who are living another life, and the couples living that one where, contraception will never be part of their lives, they seem to be so happy. Their lives seem to be flourishing and their health as well.
Mm. The truth will set you free. And I think if they're living the truth by way of their bodily exchange, the total and fruitful love they show to one another, that can only result in happiness. And so I'd like to, we've spoken a little bit on contraception. There's a weird, almost category of people that will say or would argue, wouldn't it be better for there to be more contraception available than to have an abortion? How do you respond to something like that?
50 years ago, I think I would have at least understood where they were coming from, because we didn't have the practice, the experience we have now. Societies which contracept the most have the most abortions. Contraception does not prevent abortions in Western societies, far from it. The two coexist virtually hand in hand. And that's understandable when you go back to that basic metaphysical level, that if I believe that I can control my body, and that by controlling my body, my life will be more fulfilling, well, then abortion simply becomes the next step. So the anti-love aspect of contraception, which is I want to give myself completely to you except for my fertility, it starts off as anti-love, because your love can't be unconditional if you want to keep your fertility from your partner. That then very quickly leads on to the anti-life aspect as well, and hence abortion becomes simply the next logical step. And societies which show that where contraception is, the modus operandi, abortion on demand is it's simply a matter of time. So it seems logical at a very superficial level. It has absolutely no logic at a much deeper level, and at a practical level, it's simply a lie. And that is, I guess, why that's why I try and encourage doctors, pro-life doctors, to go into O&G, because it's suddenly all that theory, you see it in practice, to allow couples, their lives to flourish, their families to flourish, and, to welcome children anytime, anywhere. And that is what, to me, is getting to the unconditional love of a mother. I think as men, we struggle a little bit with unconditional love. We get it from our mother, we get it from our spouses. Women seem to be able to love, I think, they naturally seem to be loved more unconditionally than men. They teach us how to love unconditionally. And if we haven't got women and mothers teaching their husbands, their sons, how to love unconditionally, well, then love becomes negotiable. And that's what abortion's all about. It's about suddenly that unborn child's love is subject to negotiation. It's sometimes too hard to even contemplate that a child's love would be negotiable, but abortion does exactly that. When I'm counselling, I'm desperately trying to give that woman every support you possibly can, but it's still a form of negotiation, and it shouldn't be. So that when you rid your society of contraception and abortion, you create that unconditional love which spreads through all society, men and women, and that's how society flourishes.
It's a culture thing, isn't it?
Very
We
much.
want to instill it in the culture.
The culture of death, the culture of life.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Most definitely. Now, to just elaborate on the end of contraception. So, what a person is hoping for when they contracept is to avoid or space a pregnancy. What would you say to a person that would say, well, Catholics just ease their consciences because rather than contracept, they use something called natural family planning? Both, I suppose, want to achieve the same end, but a different means. Talk to us about the difference in those things.
Look, it's a good point, and again, you can understand where they're coming from when they say, we take a pill, you just use bodily rhythms to achieve the same ends. And to some extent, they're right. The ends can be similar, which is the spacing of children. And the church accepts that, and we all accept it unconditionally, that there are times in a couple's life where circumstances may be so dire, health problems, severe financial strains. In other words, there's the ends which at times can be justified, but the means become very, very important, because in any action, the means and the ends both must be good. So whilst you can understand at times the ends are justified, remembering at the same time that the ends can also be very selfish. But that's not for us to judge. We can't decide for a couple what justifies the ends, but the means become very important, because the means of contraception means you're denying a part of yourself to your partner. So of its very nature, it's conditional love. It's not unconditional, because I'm removing, always when I contracept, I remove my fertility from you. At the same time, natural family planning, it's like a fertile tree, which at times isn't fruitful. It's still fertile, but for some particular reason, at that time it's not fruitful, but the tree will always be fertile. With contraception, the tree becomes sterile. It's never open to life. And that couple who are contracepting aren't open to life. The natural family planning situation, both couples are still, it's a passive thing. It's not an active use of technology to sterilize my fertility. It's a passive acceptance that I'm only fertile one day a month. A woman is only fertile one day a month. God has created life in such a way that each month there's 27, 28, 29 days when a pregnancy can't occur. If human beings use nature for a good means, for an unselfish means, you can't compare that to using a technology and an active intent to deny your fertility to your partner. They are so diametrically opposed that, yes, at a superficial level, they seem similar, but at a very deep level, they're very, very different.
Yes, most
And
definitely.
couples understand it intuitively.
One of the ways that I've tried to navigate that with the couples that I prepare for marriage, um, there are going to be days where you're going to feel extremely close to one another. But on those days, it may not be possible to come together in the marital act. But what contraception does is say we can be together at any time we want to be. If we've got an itch, we can scratch it. And I don't want to demean that sacred act to phrases like that. But ultimately, contraception is saying that people can say we're close, we're intimate together. But again, that intention, because there will be times when people are practicing NFP where they will want to be together with such a physical
Passion.
attraction and passion, but they're unable to. And so there are different ways that they can be intimate with each other. I'm a bit of an old school romantic as a priest. I love telling people, go for a walk and hold hands. Hold each other as you're watching a movie. Speak together. When the kids have gone down to bed, just sit there together and open up your hearts to each other. There are many other ways to be fruitful in those moments. So I think if we can really change that culture and encourage people and say that it's not always about the sex, that we can come together in different ways, different levels of intimacy, then NFP becomes a feasible thing that they can practice. And contraception becomes something that is almost to a degree repulsive because it changes the dynamic of that relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a wonderful way of putting it, and it's couples know that. It's unfortunately contraception of its very nature. It's a desire to control the body, whereas with with natural family planning, you're not dominating your bodily self. You're working within it. You're letting your body, you're letting the human body both be expressed and be expressed in the personal self, so that there's no there's no separation of that expression of the body and the self. They are in complete harmony with each other. But contraception, it separates that bodily self from the personal self, and it's the desire to control them separately so that the two can't be in harmony with each other. And as a result, we can't flourish the way we were meant to. And couples intuitively know it in terms of their love for each other. Because if a man's ready to say, I love you so much that I will abstain on this day because you're not in a position where you feel, you can manage a pregnancy at this stage, that is the woman recognises it as an absolute act of love on his part. That his love for her, his feeling for her is so strong that he will, allow her body to still be in harmony with each other rather than trying to separate it through technology and the like. It's a very, very deep, meaningful, feeling they have for each other. And it's just as much as couples respond to it in your marriage guidance at a very practical level when you're dealing with, women's health issues. It comes to the fore.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've spoken a bit about contraception. Let's talk about when conception happens. So at that moment, and it used to be one of the, I suppose, debatable points many years ago in the pro-choice rhetoric, clump of cells, all that kind. We know very clearly, and we have known, that life begins at the moment of conception, where the sperm meets the egg. That's a new life, its own set of DNA, unique, and it's growing, constantly growing. So, the question I have is, people like, for example, Paul, who's been on the sidewalks, who's been counseling, yourself when a woman comes into your office and is having an initial consult. What if a woman, in her own panic, is opposed to this pregnancy? What is it that we can say to her? What have you said to her? I'm sure you've had this in the many decades that you've been practicing. She's opposed to the pregnancy. She doesn't want it. Can you force her to keep it? What can you do for this child and her situation in a very, I suppose, unstable and panicked mood?
Yes, I mean, look, yeah, it's. I've experienced it so many times. I wish I hadn't, but I have, and that's the way it's meant to be. And if a woman feels that vulnerable, that she feels she has no choice, you feel lucky that you're in a position where you may be able to assist to lighten her load, because no counsellor will ever talk a woman into continuing on with a pregnancy. That idea that doctor saved so many lives, that counsellor saved so many lives, I don't go along with that. All the doctor, the counsellor does is lighten the woman's load enough that she feels capable of continuing on with the pregnancy. That's what our role is. So the first thing you've got to do is listen. And that may take 3 hours. It doesn't matter. You just keep listening and listening so that the woman feels, hopefully, that you're starting to understand her predicament. And that's just the beginning. Once, hopefully, she's got your trust, that you're not there to impose yourself on her, that none of us can stop ultimately what a woman's going to do with the pregnancy, then hopefully you can move on to a different mindset where she recognises that all you want to do is literally lighten her load, or, as I said, try and make the world stop until the entire world makes themselves available for her problem and her predicament. Now, that can sound like idealised, fairy floss stuff. It's actually not, in a sense that how precious is her unborn child. If you believe that that unborn child is so precious that nothing on this earth can harm it, well, then you will move heaven and earth to try and ensure that that child sees the light of day, and that's what you'll do. So it becomes a matter of trust, making sure that every facility is available for her to continue on with the pregnancy. Many women choose not to avail themselves of that, and there's nothing we can do about that. You then move on to, that next fear, which is, does society want a situation where literally any pregnancy can be aborted at any time? And look, I think we've got to admit that we live in a society where most opinion polls suggest that 60, 70% of recipients believe in a access to safe abortion. Most of it is in the first trimester up to 12 weeks. Most Gallup polls, most opinion polls would only suggest that a third, 35% of people believe in access to a legal abortion at any time through a pregnancy. So there's still a significant proportion of people out there who do not agree, do not believe that an unborn child should legally be terminated at any stage of their existence. And we have to work with those people. We have to try and find common ground where we can change society so that ultimately no woman would ever feel she has to destroy her unborn child. Now we know that that probably will never exist as part of the human condition, the human predicament, because even in the past where abortion was illegal, where it was punishable, women still sought out backyard abortions. It was horrible. It was tragic, to be avoided at all costs. And we have to find, that balance where no woman feels she has to destroy her unborn, or that she allows her unborn child to be destroyed. Massive, massive problem. But we can never lose heart, because at the end of the day, if we want our society to flourish in terms of an unconditional love, to me, imagine if every life was so precious that you could never, ever harm it. There'd be no wars. Because, a life is just so precious that you can't take a life away. You can't destroy it. It's simply beyond human realms to do that. So yes, it's an ideal, but unless we keep trying to achieve the ideal, imagine if we only get 90% of the way. It's going to be a much better society, a much more loving society than we have at the moment.
Amen. Amen. One of the, I suppose, arguments for the right to terminate is generally very broadly thrown around the health of the mother. In your 45 years of experience, has a child ever had to be terminated so that the mother would live, or vice versa?
It's a great question. And back in 1979, 1980, lots of doctors were saying that to me, Catholic doctors especially. They were saying, Simon, don't do obstetrics, because, you will find you have to decide between a mother and a baby. And I used to, because I knew nothing in those days, I had no experience, I used to think, this is going to be, an awakening for me. I absolutely promise you that after 45 years, not only have I ever had to choose between a mother and a baby, I've never seen a mother die in order to save a baby. And I've never worked in a hospital where a mother was sacrificed for the sake of the baby. And that is the complete and honest truth. The reason being that a baby and a mother's health are so intertwined that you never have to choose. And it's interesting that, again, medical moral teaching has allowed Catholic obstetricians to practice obstetrics without ever having to choose between the two, because there's an enormous difference between a direct abortion and an indirect abortion. I have never ever come across a direct abortion being performed in order to save a woman's life. It doesn't exist. But an indirect abortion, where the classic example is if a woman had cancer of the womb, cancer of her uterus, and it was just about to spread. And the day she came in to have the operation of choice, which is a hysterectomy, they found that she was 8 weeks pregnant. Now, Catholic moral teaching, using the principle of double effect, would argue that the treatment for that woman's cancer of the uterus is a hysterectomy. The reason you're doing the hysterectomy is to save the woman's life from cancer of the uterus. If you do a hysterectomy, indirectly, that baby will die. We know that. It's unavoidable. But at no stage are you doing that hysterectomy to kill the baby. You are only doing the hysterectomy to remove a uterus which is cancerous. So it's a principle of double effect. It's an indirect abortion, and it is legitimate and valid therapy, which at no stage is intended to kill the baby. It is indirect and it's permissible. And using that principle of double effect, there are situations in obstetrics where you have to embark on a procedure to save a woman's life. It will result in the indirect, inadvertent, unavoidable loss of the child at it's always a pre-viable baby, because any time you've got viability, you just deliver the baby and give the baby to the neonatologist and proceed with whatever the mother needed to save her life. So we're only talking about a pre-viable baby, which at the present stage of neonatal care in Australia is probably 22 weeks and 5 days. At 22 weeks and 5 days, 22 weeks and 6 days, neonatologists are now letting couples know that that baby is salvageable.
Wow.
So it's really less than 22 weeks. And at no time is, for example, say the placenta had a massive abscess in it, whereby the placenta was completely infected and diseased with an abscess. Now, we know whenever any other organ in the body has an abscess, you remove it. If the gallbladder has an abscess and the woman's life's at danger, you remove the gallbladder, you remove the abscess. If a placenta is so infected that the mother's life is in danger and the baby's life, you can deliver the placenta to save the mother's life, even though indirectly, unavoidably, it will result in the loss of the child. So, as I say, I've never come across a situation where a direct abortion was necessary to save a mother's life. But yet, Catholic obstetricians can work in tertiary hospitals with, with the very, very best of obstetric and neonatal care, and feel completely safe and confident that they can practice good moral obstetric practice and never once need access to a direct abortion.
If I may, one of the other examples of an indirect, and you might want to clarify this for me, is when the new life either lodges itself or gets stuck in the fallopian tube.
Yes.
What is that? And can you explain if that same principle applies?
It does apply. We're talking about an ectopic pregnancy where the fertilized egg, as it makes its way down the fallopian tube to implant in the uterus, for some reason starts to implant in the wall of the fallopian tube and starts to grow. And that growth can reach various stages. So at some stage, you've got mainly placental invasion without formation of a viable embryo. It's really like a miscarriage, except instead of the miscarriage being in the uterus, it's in the tube. And it's treated either medically with a medication to suppress the placental growth, knowing that there's no embryonic viability, or there's no live embryo or child there. Or you can have recourse to surgery to remove the tube. Various options are given to the mother. At other times, implantation will have proceeded to such a degree that it's resulted in a sac and a live embryo. So you can actually see on ultrasound the pregnancies in the tube, and that you have a live embryo with a heartbeat. Now, in that circumstance, I will not use a drug, we call it methotrexate, to kill the baby. Because my argument is that I'm using therapy to directly kill the baby to treat that ectopic pregnancy. And hence I won't do that, because to me that's a direct abortion. However, if I remove the tube, it's called a salpingectomy, to me the principle of double effect applies again, where I'm not removing that embryo directly. I'm removing a pathological tube, which is a tube where a placenta has implanted and invaded the tube, which is a pathological process. It's not a physiological process. If it was implanting in the wall of the womb, it would be a physiological process. This is pathological. And the principle of double effect allows us that where you have pathology, which is threatening a woman's life, you are allowed to remove abnormal pathology. And that's what an ectopic pregnancy is. The loss of the live embryo is unavoidable. It's indirect. Your main aim, your only aim, is to remove a tube where the placenta has implanted through it, and it's either bleeding internally or it's about to rupture and bleed internally.
So we've had, I suppose, some discussion on early stages of pregnancy, on direct and indirect, which is a very important principle. That principle of double effect is extremely important in these situations and in general. Now we move forward just a little bit as we continue to develop in the pregnancy. I've had many married couples ask my advice on the types of testing they get as they go through the pregnancy. And I don't know the name of this particular test, but it can discover things like syndromes such as Down syndrome and the like, where at that particular point the option is then given if a child is diagnosed in that early stage. I'd just like your opinion on these types of tests, how they came about, why they're necessary. Does a couple have the right to say to whoever their doctor is, we don't want this test? If we have a pregnancy, we have a pregnancy. We don't want this test, because some couples have relayed back to me that they feel pressured to undertake these tests. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, it's very true what you say, that some couples do feel under pressure because many doctors feel they have an obligation to identify any unborn child with a congenital or a genetic problem, that is the role of medicine, their role to identify that and then provide an option of a termination. The way they perceive their role as a doctor, as an obstetrician, the way I see my role is obviously very, very different. We must keep in mind that at no stage are a couple obligated to do those tests. It involves a blood test, initially what we call NIPT, non-invasive. It's a non-invasive test where you collect some of mum's blood and you're able to identify fetal cells in mum's circulation, because there's always some cells from the baby who cross through the placenta into mum's circulation. It's a wonderful physiological process and probably has benefits which to some extent we may not understand completely. But it allows doctors to access fetal cells, and you can look at fetal genes and you can identify chromosomal and genetic anomalies. Now, to me, all that is knowledge. It doesn't involve any action at all other than if the mother wants a blood test, she can have it. The knowledge which she gains from the blood test, then that becomes the important aspect. How do you use that knowledge? A couple may argue, if I know my child's got Down syndrome, I'm not going to do anything to prevent my child coming into existence, but to some extent, I will prepare myself and my family and my children for a child who may look a little bit different, who may act a little bit different, but still will be as welcome in our family as any other child. In other words, it's simply how you use the knowledge. Other couples may use that knowledge to terminate the pregnancy. At the end of the day, I never have a problem with knowledge, because human beings will use knowledge for good or for bad. If we don't have the knowledge, we can't use it for good. So I would encourage couples from day one to always feel that they are in control of their pregnancy, to the extent that nothing they deem to be a threat to their child should ever be entertained. And if they're finding that much kickback from their obstetrician, that it's becoming uncomfortable and untenable, they find another obstetrician who's going to reflect their values. Hopefully not me.
Yeah.
Because they don't, I'm too old for it. But there's a lot of very good young obstetricians who will be completely at ease with their decision making. And believe me, couples day in, day out say, oh no, I don't want any of that testing. Good as gold.
Okay. Yeah, it's just something that I've come across often, and my natural instinct is to say, well, if you don't want it, then don't do it. But you've given me a different perspective on, okay, it might even be an aid for a couple that say, no matter what, we're firm in our belief, we're having this child, but it also then helps us prepare for something that may be a change in our life, which ultimately God will use in a beautiful way to help sanctify the family and the space.
And another wonderful scenario I've seen many times is, for whatever reason, a couple have had the testing, they've discovered their child has a condition. Some minor, some very, very major, virtually, well, incompatible with life, where they know that child will not survive for minutes or hours after they're born. Most couples will terminate that pregnancy. There are some couples who, despite knowing that for the next 8 months they're carrying a child who will not live for more than an hour, they still continue on with that pregnancy. It is heroic to the extreme, and yet their heroism has an effect on their carers, on their obstetricians, the nurses who look after them. Initially, I've seen some of those carers put them under pressure and say, you have no right to bring this child into the world, and various things. But over time, it's amazing how those people often change their attitude and see the love those parents have for this unborn child who is going to die. And they warm, they learn from that heroic example. And it's another reason how, goodness can actually come out of it.
Wow. It definitely is heroism. It
It
definitely
is.
It's courage, and I mean,
There's many heroic couples out
oh,
there, believe me, which again makes obstetric practice so humbling when you see that. There's so many couples who, I would argue, have taught me to love properly, because in a much deeper way, because my life has to some extent been so easy in terms of, nothing like that's ever happened to me. And when you see women and couples struggle through those times, it's very humbling. And you go home with a different perspective.
I can imagine. I'd like to touch on fear for a moment. And a lot of doctors, and it probably spans various industries and professions, but a lot of people will operate out of the realm of fear. And so there might be doctors in your field that might say, well, look, this is what the textbook says, this is what I have to do, and if I don't do it, I'm going to be sued, I'm going to be fired, I'm going to be this or that or whatever. Now, I don't like operating out of fear, because God tells us not to operate out of that area, and perfect love casts out fear. But when you're literally talking life and death, in your experiences, for example, we look at this testing, we think, okay, the doctors have said you're only going to have minutes or hours with this child once it's born. For me, how can you know that? How can you know that it's going to be minutes or hours? What if it's weeks or months or perhaps years? How do you combat that? And what do you say to that when the textbooks just have it so black and white that they just group everyone into the same category? God's made us all unique. There's room for grace there. There's room for healing. Have you been ever tempted to say, well, you don't know what you're talking about, because there's something at play here that could be bigger than us? Expand.
Um, I don't think that it's as black and white as you think. Medicine isn't black. Anybody who's practiced medicine for a while knows it's not black and white. It's forever grey. And what you say is completely right in terms of there are some chromosomal anomalies, particularly chromosome trisomy, what we call 13, 18, Edwards syndrome, Pastoral syndrome. And we know that the vast majority of those babies are simply going to succumb, most of them within minutes or hours. We know as well that there's some isolated examples where they've lived longer. And all of that information must be made available to couples. To me, it doesn't matter that much whether that child with a trisomy lives 3 hours or 3 days. If you're lucky, 3 months. The parents have waited so long for this child, they don't care. Every second will be a blessing for them. So that if a doctor says 100% your baby's going to die within 3 minutes, you know they have no idea what they're talking about. And the books won't support what they've said. The statistics are out there because we know these conditions occur, and there are couples who allow that child to die a natural death. So we know we can counsel accordingly. In terms of fear of litigation, so long as you provide the couple with all the information and they're the ones calling the shots, you never have to fear litigation or medico-legal issues. So long as your practice is always and unequivocally directed at the care of the mother and her child, you'll never be litigated against. It's, litigation is about negligence. It's not about different therapies directed with the parents' consent towards their health and well-being and that of their child. I guess the scenario you could be alluding to in terms of Catholic obstetricians, the couple who elect to have a test, it comes back that their child has a lethal condition and they elect to terminate, and you inform the couple that it's a part of your practice which you're not able to provide. And you do it in a way whereby hopefully they respect your decision. And at the same time, sometimes it gives them the opportunity to explore options which another clinician may not give them because, for example, to them, there's only one recourse, and that is termination. Interestingly, we know from statistics that where you have a pregnancy where an unborn child has a lethal anomaly, there's a 99% chance they're going to die within 6 hours. If that woman terminates the pregnancy at, say, 18 weeks when they discover the condition, as against a woman who allows the pregnancy to continue to term, delivers the baby dies in her arms at 6 hours of age. Interestingly, the chance of mental health issues weeks after the child's either terminated or born, a bit of, say, post-traumatic stress, the incidence of post-traumatic stress is greater in the couple who terminated than in the woman who saw the pregnancy through to its natural end. Now, that's been written up in journals. We know it exists. Intuitively, you suspect that that would be the case anyway, but it's interesting it comes out in statistics. Now, to me, a couple are entitled to know that. Again, it's information, it's knowledge which is directed at their health and well-being.
Yes.
You don't want a couple to have post-traumatic stress after the loss of their child. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the woman who terminates. It's a tragedy for the woman whose child dies in her arms at 3 or 6 hours of age. But you haven't done that couple any disservice, any injustice by making them aware of that possibility. To me, you're providing them with information directed at their long-term health and well-being. They may elect not to avail themselves of that information, and you part ways. Hopefully on a basis where there's no angst or
well, on that
bad
note,
feeling.
On that note, how important is the pastoral sensitivity around these conversations? Because it's very easy to just give information, and I suppose anyone could give information. Of course, they're accredited and they've done their training and the like. But there's a difference with delivering information with love and concern versus perhaps the fear that might accommodate or come with, I've seen too many things, I've had too many experiences, so I'm just going to give it to them how it is, and they can, process all of that the way they want, versus giving it to them how it is, but showing a love and concern for the human beings that stand before you. Can you speak to the pastoral sensitivity around a lot of these conversations?
Yes, because it's very, very true what you say. There's no doubt that the person giving the message, to some extent, will have an impact on the outcome, and we know this. When you look at feto-maternal units where there's a lot of tertiary advanced ultrasound being used to identify at-risk pregnancies where there's a suspicion of an anomaly in the child. And some of those conditions are lethal. Some of them are not lethal, but they will result in a handicap, in an incapacity for the child of varying degrees. Study after study has shown that for the same condition in a child, depending on the feto-maternal specialist providing the information, the options, the counselling, the level of discrepancy between couples who elect to continue on with the pregnancy and those who terminate is significant, which is concerning to the medical profession, because it means that the same condition is being transmitted to a couple in a very different way, whereby those couples will elect to continue on with the pregnancy because they believe that the child's disability, incapacity will not be of such a significant degree in the child's life and the family life that they feel it warrants termination, whereas another couple have been counselled by a different person that they don't have the confidence that that would be the case. So it's very, very important, the the person giving the information, it's often reflecting their attitude to disability, to incapacity in society, to their sort of core beliefs of how precious a life is. And whilst it's very concerning, it's at the end of the day, it's I guess you think to yourself, well, that would be the case. Because, we all know amongst our confreres, there's some people who the glass is always half empty and there's others it's half full. And it gets down to how precious you see life is.
Yes.
So it's, you're spot on. There's no doubt it exists out there that the person giving the information, that's why you've got to make yourself the best possible doctor you can, not only in terms of your technical expertise in providing quality care, but your knowledge. You have to you've just got to work on having the knowledge whereby you can counsel, advise couples and women in such a way that you're always providing hope. Always providing hope. They may not necessarily take it. Not you're providing hope in a false way where you're giving them false information. That's not what the medical profession's all about. But always information can be given in a pastoral way whereby hope is always there. Hope always, as you say, springs eternal.
Amen. Amen to that. We're talking about practice. We're talking about what the textbooks can often say. And something that hits a little close to home because my sister-in-law has had 5 of them and you've delivered a few of her children. Caesarean section. Some people will say you've had 1 or 2, they're high risk, you should stop having children. Is there a textbook response to that? Is it an individual thing? Just a bit of your expertise around this area, because I've encountered families where they've been told you need to stop having children. So, if you may.
So, at the end of the day, a mother can have as many caesarean sections as she wants. With each caesarean section, there may be a slightly increased risk that the placenta will become implanted in the site of the previous caesarean section, which it does increase the risk of her having bleeding issues through the pregnancy. But at the end of the day, it's about providing, again, knowledge, information, so that the couple can decide the risks they want to take. It's not up to the doctor to impose their views on a couple. And at the end of the day, the truth is, I know there's a lot of obstetricians who think every couple should not have 2, 3 children, that it's imposing a threat to the planet, to humanity. You've heard it, I've heard it, Unfortunately, we have to hear them out, but, luckily we elect to go our own way. And they will often advise a couple whereby their own biases are coming through. And sometimes they can distort the statistics. What we're talking about is a placenta accreta, where in a first pregnancy, it may have a risk of, it could be 1 in 1,000. After 5 caesareans, it could be again, these aren't precise, but say after 5 or 6 caesareans, it could have gone from 1 in 1,000 to 3 or 4 in 100. That's a significant increase. But it also means that possibly in her 6th pregnancy, and that there's a 90% chance she won't have a placenta accreta. And if you're at the races, the horse races, and they tell you that that horse has a 90% chance of winning the next race, you tend to put a bit of money on it. And that is what couples are entitled to. Sometimes doctors think that couples aren't capable of deciding what risks they're willing to take to have another child in their family. And all it is, again, you make yourself technically skillful, whereby you can perform caesareans in such a way that you try and reduce the chances of subsequent placenta accretas. It's not, at the end of the day, it's most of the time it's not up to our technical expertise to reduce that. There may be ways you can reduce it. But at the end of the day, the statistic, we know it increases the risk, but that is up to the couple to decide. And, the truth is, I've done somebody's 9th caesarean. They never had placenta accreta. They were very comfortable with having 9 caesarean sections. They wanted 9 children. It's not up to us to decide how many children a couple should have. It's only up to us, one, not to impose our bias on them, to provide the latest in information and knowledge so they can make the call, and to make yourself technically skillful, whereby whatever arises, you're able to minister to that woman and child to the very best of your ability.
Isn't it interesting how autonomy on one end is worshipped?
Yes.
And then when it comes to perhaps something like this, they almost want to take it away from you through their bias or pressure or medical opinion.
Yes. Interestingly, 15 years ago, a lot of obstetricians were advising women not to have more than 3 caesareans. I would argue in the last 3 years that the statistics have so overwhelmingly demonstrated that the risk between 3 and 4 caesareans is so small that now most obstetricians won't advise women not to have a 4th. So it's just marvellous that we're using knowledge and statistics to allow couples to be better informed and be able to make more evidence-based choices about the size of their family. And as I say, so long as a couple are comfortable with that knowledge, I'm happy to do as many caesareans as they want. And there's a lot of obstetricians out there feel the same way.
Amazing. And I think this is the type of poise and balance we need around these types of conversations. Again, fear can't play a part. And just to hear the way you've approached each particular scenario in our conversation today gives me great hope that those that I hope will watch and listen to this particular conversation will gain a bit more confidence and say yes to life and love. And so just perhaps as a closer, what would your message be to families either starting out or married couples considering expanding their family what would you say to them?
I would say that my wife is a natural family planning counsellor, and she's very, very knowledgeable about her fertility, and we have 11 children.
Thanks be to God.
And the reason we have 11 children is because every single child who's come along has been precious, beyond description. And never, ever worry about another child.
Amen. Amen. Dr. Simon McCaffrey, an absolute pleasure.
No, it's
and
a pleasure.
God bless you.
You shouldn't have asked me that last question.
That's what we're going to finish on today, and it's a beautiful thing to have your knowledge and your vulnerability and the way that you've just approached this conversation, the balance you've brought to such highly strung topics. If the world, I pray the world gets this out. I don't usually shamelessly plug any episodes we do, but for those that have watched or listened, please share this with your family and friends. It's so important to get this message out, to show that there are men and women out there that love life, that love families, and they're not invested in their own to the point of selfishness that they want to pour their life out for others. And that's what so many of us want to do, to support couples, to support women in crisis pregnancies, to support everyone in all of this. And you've brought great balance and light to a lot of these topics today. So we thank you for your generosity.
Look, it's a pleasure. And to me, apropos that last question, remember that with every extra child, it's going to be less loneliness in your life.
Amen.
And there is so much loneliness out there in the world that if people are worrying about how we stop the loneliness, it's actually quite simple. Have another child.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you for your time today.
No, it's a pleasure.
God bless you.
You keep well.
God bless you.
You keep well.
Keep,
and Anthony, thank you.
A1's been here today, patiently sitting through this conversation, and we've learned so much.
And he hasn't had a seat.
And he hasn't had a seat. God bless him. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Please share this particular conversation, as we encourage you to do with all of our Parousia podcasts, family and friends across all your platforms. Share it, spread the word, spread the good news, the light and the truth that only comes from Jesus. We thank you for being with us today. God bless you all.